In the world of classic Western movies, the man who shot Liberty Valance stands tall. Directed by four-time Academy winner John Ford, who of course by that time is no stranger to directing Westerns. You have Stagecoach, you have The Searchers, his Cavalry trilogy, and on. But for Liberty Valance, he brings together this all-star cast. Shooting in black and white, you have John Wayne. You have Jimmy Stewart performing in a Western. You have, of course, Lee Marvin, and a really, what I think, underrated performance by Vera Miles. But I'm getting ahead of myself just a little bit. What I want to talk about is a gun. And a gun, if it's lucky, gets two lives. First is, of course, its useful life, when it's being used. But like all things with a useful life, there comes a time when it's no longer useful. If it's lucky, a gun then gets a second life, when it becomes a collector's piece, something to be kept, whether that's in a collector's market, whether that's a family heirloom, or whether it becomes a part of a legacy. It moves on to something different, something grander. But the Colt I'm here to talk to you about today actually has lived 3 different lives. It's been just that fortunate, and they date all the way back to 1885. That was the year this Colt was shipped, right in the heart of the Old West era. It finds itself shipped on November 21st, 1885, part of a 6-gun shipment to J.C. Petmecke of Austin, Texas. Now he's especially worth mentioning because Mr. Petmecke was an established firearms retailer in Austin at that time. In fact, for a long time. Well, by the time Mr. Petmecke passed in 1926, his store had been in operation for 74 years, excepting, of course, some years he took off to go fight for the Confederacy. Petmecke had also done business with some major names of the era, including Ben McCullough, and one gentleman you may have heard of, Mr. Sam Houston. In 1885 is a heck of a time to being shipped to Austin, Texas. It's embroiled in this tumultuous era known as the fence cutting wars. Also, in Austin in 85, the city finds itself on edge. There is literally an axe-murdering serial killer on the loose, known as the Servant Girl Annihilator, a moniker which is every bit earned from his gruesome crimes. Given the fence cutting war and the presence of an axe murderer on the loose, can't imagine that this Colt would have stayed on the shelves for long. But for all that exciting and violent Texas history that this gun enters into for its first life, its history is then lost to time. And it doesn't start back up until decades later, when it becomes the property of the Stembridge Rental Company. Now, Stembridge doesn't sound very glitzy or glamorous, but they were one of the most notable firearms rental companies in Hollywood, California. In fact, at one point, Stembridge even had some facilities on the Paramount Studios lot. They were who you went to see when you needed to equip your movie. This Colt had traveled from the real Old West to that of the silver screen, and it couldn't have picked a better time to do it. Now, when Stembridge came into possession of this Colt isn't currently documented, presumably in the 1920s or 1930s, before they became true collector pieces and when they could still be obtained relatively cheaply for movie work. But its second life, documented, begins in 1961, when Stembridge rents this Colt single-action army out for a picture with Mr. John Ford. The invoice, a copy of which is included with this Colt single action, lists all the items rented by Stembridge and is really only notated in the upper right-hand corner, Lib Valance. On this invoice sheet are 2 revolvers for John Wayne, all the dummy rubber guns that are needed for tossing or far-off shots as Hollywood likes to do. There's even a line item for 1 Mexican knife. But about a quarter of the way down the sheet, there's a single line item for a revolver, serial number 107347, Lee Marvin. Ladies and gentlemen, this is 107347 for Lee Marvin, playing the titular role in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Marvin plays the role of Liberty Valance perfectly. With his silver-handled quirt beating townsfolk, he wears this Colt single-action army butt forward on his strong side. And when you watch The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, you can see him reaching around with his strong hand, grabbing the grips, ready to whirl around and flip it at a moment's notice. Since its 1961 run-in with Liberty Valance, revolver, of course, went on to be featured in other productions as well. Not surprising for a rental company revolver. It starred in a couple seasons of Bonanza, The Last Rebel, starring Joe Namath, and 1979's Standing Tall. A little further research might just find a few pictures Stembridge rented this out for prior to 1961's Liberty Valance. When Stembridge sold off most of its inventory in 1999, this Colt revolver entered the third and last life it would ever have, that in the collector market. Since then, its provenance comes really well documented, a copy of which comes with the revolver, and you could be its next link. You could be the next owner of the pistol drawn by Liberty Valance. So from the violent streets of Austin, Texas, to the Hollywood silver screen in Lee Marvin, this is the revolver of Liberty Valance. It's available this August at Rock Island Auction Company. Till next time, keep your powder dry, Pilgrim.